hit record just so that all of you know. So, all right, welcome everyone to the science of tiger beetles. We'll go ahead and get started. I am going to share my screen with everybody here. There's always like 10,000 buttons to push. All right. All right, and also be admitting people as they come in as well. So, okay, so today we're going to go ahead and talk about tiger beetles. So, like I mentioned, this is kind of like a specific science of today, but we're really going to dive into what tiger beetles are. It's a really cool thing for Nebraska since we have an endemic species, which simply means that we have one species in Nebraska that can be found nowhere else in the world. So being an endemic species is really interesting, especially for our state. So let's go ahead and get started. If you've been to a science of before, welcome. If you haven't, welcome anyway. So like I've mentioned earlier, for those of you that have been on before, we encourage you to ask questions and leave comments in the chat. However, just make sure that they're all on topic and that we're being kind to each other. Otherwise, we do have that right to remove you from the program. And I also want to point out, I am by no means a tiger beetle expert. We have a tiger beetle expert here in the building. His name is Sean Dunn. And Sean has helped me with this presentation. He's given me a ton of information. So if for some reason I cannot answer a question, I will relate that to Sean. Sean also takes care of all of our herps, so all of our reptiles and amphibians, all of our small mammals, all of our insects, and all of our bats. So he's quite busy, but let's go ahead and talk about science and talk about tiger beetles. So Sean and I work very closely together. He's more the biologist and the field researcher, and I am the science communicator. So all right, so let's go ahead and talk a little bit about tiger beetles and kind of where they came from, how they got to be these modern, very interesting, cool, predatory insects. So if you've never seen a tiger beetle before, here's a great example of a close-up image of what they look like. They have these very large eyes. They have these really often shiny, metallic, bright colors, these long legs. And then one of the most interesting things about them is their mandibles. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later, or their mouth parts. So let's go ahead and talk about kind of where they came from. So as you can imagine, like any insect, finding a fossil remnant of an insect, especially a tiger beetle, is going to be extremely rare, just because they don't really form fossils like a normal mammal would or a plant would, but they have that exoskeleton, that hard outer shell on the outside. So it's extremely rare to find one, but it does happen. So there's little really that's known about their early evolutionary history, but there has been an earliest tiger beetle found. It was found from the lower Cretaceous in an area of a formation of China. And so this was the earliest one to have been found, but they do belong to this group of this family known as the Cincindelidae, which is the group of tiger beetles. It's one of the oldest families of beetles. And when you think about beetles, we also did a science of beetles a couple years ago. There's a lot of beetles out there. It's one of the most numerous families of insects. And so there's quite the range of beetles. But this is one of the oldest families of beetles, dates back to the late Triassic period, which is around 200 million years ago. So looking at the very few fossil evidence pieces that scientists do have, it suggests that they look quite similar to our modern species. So with that information, we can kind of tell that they haven't changed a ton. So they're probably pretty good in their adaptations. They're very well adapted to living in lots of different environments, which you'll see here in a little bit. But overall, these animals are very adapted to living now in this modern day area. And even though they haven't changed much in those 200 million years. So thinking about a tiger beetle, they're in the order Coleoptera, and then that subfamily that we talked about. They're also named, why do they name tiger beetles? They don't have stripes on them, but they're named after that voracious eating habits and habitats of both the larvae and the adults. And we'll talk more about that. But I mentioned earlier their mandibles. So they have very interesting mandibles that are sickle shaped, and they look quite sharp when given up close to them. But that's how they get their names. In the world, there's about 2,600 species just of tiger beetles alone. And like I mentioned, they're named after the way that they eat. And then these animals also, as you can maybe imagine, are very sought after and collected worldwide because of their colors. So a lot of these animals are brightly colored. They're metallic green and purple and orange, and they have all these cool markings on them. So a lot of collectors like to have them in rosin or in pieces in their homes and in their collections. But also scientists really like them because they're easy to study and they make very good models of lots of different types of themes. So things like thermoregulation, predator-prey relationships, physiology, biology, the community ecology of all of these animals. So they make really good models for people to study. And they're also one of the best studied non-pest insects. So there's a lot of scientists out there that study pest insects because of food and agriculture, and then also people with their homes. But tiger beetles are one of those that we study because they are non-pest insects. All right, so here's a quick video. It was very hard to find videos of tiger beetles, but I do have one, and I swear it does move. There's no sound, so if you're waiting for sound, there won't be any. It kind of seems like this animal is stuck, and it's just a photo, but I swear it does move here. You just have to be patient. But it kind of goes to show just these little quick movements that they have, and they have this really interesting stop and go pattern that we'll talk about here. I can play it again because I know that was very short, but this is one of the best videos that I can find. But these guys, like I mentioned, they're extremely good hunters and voracious predators, and they haven't changed much in 200 million years, so they're doing something correct. All right, so let's talk a little bit then just about their physicality and kind of what they look like. So when you see a tiger beetle, how do you know it's a tiger beetle? Well, they have a very distinctive shape. Their body, their eyes, it's really elongated. They have these slender bodies. They're very streamlined in their shape, and this helps them with very good agility and speed. They're also pretty well known for just their striking appearance. So oftentimes they're very colorful, they're bright colored markings, they're iridescent, but their body shape is what really gets people. They have those big buggy eyes, they have really long antennae, they have the streamlined flattened body. It's just really well adapted for their types of life cycles. They're pretty small, so when you see them, they range from anywhere from about 5 to 20 millimeters. There are some species that get larger than 20 millimeters, but average about 5 to 20. There are some species that will well exceed that, though, in length. All right, and like we mentioned, they are part of the beetle family, but they are insects. So they share a lot of characteristics with a lot of different types of insects. Insects are the most numerous of all life forms on Earth, and they are related to common creatures such as crabs and crayfish, spiders, scorpions. They're just slightly different. So all of these animals that I just mentioned are part of this larger group known as arthropods, which means jointed foot when you break it down, that Latin word. And then all of these tiger beetles share very similar common characteristics with all the other insects. So segmented body, for instance. So they have 3 segmented body parts. They have a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. They have paired appendages. So when you look at really closely at their feet, they are paired and they're in at least 3 pairs. So 6 legs altogether. And then bilateral symmetry is another thing that insects have. So if you were to fold them in half, they look similar on either side bilaterally. And then just like all the other animals out there, insects, they have an exoskeleton. So humans have what we call an endoskeleton. We don't call it that, we call it a skeleton. But ours is on the inside, and then different for insects is theirs is on the outside, meaning exo, meaning outside, and skeleton, meaning the thing that kind of holds you up. So their skeleton is on the external part of their body, or the outside. So besides being insects, they have different body parts we mentioned earlier. They're segmented into 3 parts: the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. So the head has the eyes. So if you look really closely, you can see all the little lenses in their eyes. These guys are sight predators, and they have excellent vision because they have to chase down their food. So they're positioned on the side of their head, giving them a very wide field of view when they go to look for things. And they have very large, bulging eyes. So they, again, provides excellent vision. And within their large main eyes, they have many lenses in them. If you ever look up closely like a fly, very similar thing. So they have 2 main eyes, but they also have all these different lenses in there to give them just an even better field of view and also a better image when they look for their food. They also have antennas. This one has theirs down. It almost looks like they're coming out the bottom of their face, but they are just down. But they possess these long, what are called filiform. So they look like little tiny pieces of threads that are about half the length of the body. They're segmented and they're highly sensitive. So when they're moving around to get their food and to find their food, they're very sensitive to touch and to feel so that they can look for their food. It also helps them detect chemical signals and kind of navigate their environment. And then one of the coolest things about tiger beetles is their mandibles or their mouth parts. It's a striking feature. A lot of people, when they see a tiger beetle, besides the shape, they know it's a tiger beetle because of those mandibles, but they have these large sickle-shaped mandibles. They bite hard, not necessarily for people, but if you are a prey that is going after, it's not a fun bite. They have these very powerful jaws that are able to hold and capture that prey, and they're often toothed and can deliver quite a strong bite. All right, their thorax. This is going to be the middle portion. So they have this area behind their head, which is a way that a lot of people can identify different species. So the pronotum. So this is the area behind their head. Oftentimes it has distinctive markings on it, or maybe it doesn't have any markings on it. That's again a way to be able to identify different species. But it's very narrow and it's somewhat cylindrical. They're covered in very fine hairs, and that connects the other part of the body to the thorax. It connects the head to the thorax. They also have their legs. They're long, they're slender, they're adapted for running at high speeds. Just like other insects, they have 6 legs, and the hind legs are especially strong, and they're also bigger, and they're well suited for rapid movement. When you watched that video earlier, you notice those hind legs are a little bit larger, and so they're able to move better. And then the legs are often also covered in fine hairs that sometimes are really bright and show different colors and patterns. And then the wings are also part of the thorax. So they have 2 pairs of wings. The one pair, the front pair, is the elytra. They're very hard and they're protective, and they're a little bit more delicate hind wings. So you have these elytra that sit on top. They're very hard. They're part of that exoskeleton. And then underneath, you have the really delicate hind wings that elytra protects. The elytra, those top parts, they're very brightly colored. They're metallic, and they sometimes even have distinctive patterns or spots on them. And then the hind wings, when they come out, they are membranous and they are used mostly for flying. So they have 2 pairs of wings. One pair covers the other and protects it, and the other one is more used for flying, and it's very delicate. All right, and then you have the last kind of biggest portion of this animal, which is known as the abdomen. So the abdomen shape is going to be elongated, and it kind of tapers towards the rear. So it's segmented into different parts, and each segment has patterns and colors that vary widely among species. So again, another way to identify these animals is looking at the segments and the colors and shapes of their abdomen. And then just overall, their coloration, they're known for vivid color. Metallic coloration includes greens, blues, purples, and reds. Some species are reflective or iridescent, and that creates kind of a shimmering appearance when you look at them. They could have stripes, spots, sometimes other patterns as well. All right, and then looking at them, what is the texture like? So this exoskeleton that covers them, it's typically smooth, shiny, and it's a very hard chitinous surface. So chitin is basically the primary component of this exoskeleton. It is also part of the respiratory linings, the digestive system, and the excretory system. So chitin is what is made out of that exoskeleton. It's just a different type of protein than people have. And then the elytra, those 2 top wings that cover the hard part. Other body parts also have textures or punctures in them that add to this kind of distinctive appearance when you look at them. This one you can kind of see it almost looks grainy, but it's again that metallic cover of that elytra that makes them look kind of different. Also on this one, you can distinctively see all the hairs that are on the body and on the head and the thorax as well. All right, so that's what a tiger beetle is, and that's kind of how they evolved. Let's talk a little bit about their behavior. This one's really cool just because you talk about how fast they run and just kind of their interesting behavior as far as an insect goes. All right, so in the world, what are we looking at when we say tiger beetle? So species worldwide, there's about 2,600. In Nebraska, we have about 32 species, which doesn't sound like a ton compared to the 2,600. Nebraska actually has more than our neighboring states. So like Kansas, Iowa, South Dakota, Colorado, we have more than our neighboring states. And then just in the United States alone, there's about 100 species. And they are spread across various regions. So they have a very wide range of adaptations to adapt to different environments. You can find them at sandy beaches, riverbanks, forests, grasslands, prairies, pretty much anywhere you can find a habitat, you're going to probably find some type of tiger beetle. All right, their habitat preferences. Generally, they prefer sunny, open areas where they can hunt and bask. So here's all the different types of places that they can be found. Literally every single biome except Antarctica or the Arctic or cold areas, sandy beaches, arid regions, forests, agricultural areas. I know that when we've gone here on East Campus in Nebraska, I've seen them on the sidewalks before. So it's totally kind of up in the air, and they're wild cards about as far as where you can find them. There's lots of different regions. The sandy beaches and dunes, we have coastal tiger beetles, not Nebraska. We don't live on the coast, but there are coastal tiger beetles that thrive in these areas. They have all that open sand space, so they have a lot of high-speed chases for their food. The riverbanks and streams, that's more kind of like how Nebraska is set up. We have very sandy, moist soil, and that water is ideal for a lot of different types of species. Desert and arid regions, some species of tiger beetles are extremely adapted to living in hot, arid regions. The grasslands and meadows, they have very open areas where they can abundantly hunt their food. Forests and woodlands, there's lots of leaf litter and fallen logs they can use for cover and for hunting. And then, like I mentioned, even agricultural fields, places where they can support lots of tiger beetles and there's minimal pesticide use, but also they can support lots of areas because there's lots of other bugs, which means there's lots of other food. So orchards, agricultural fields are great areas for tiger beetles to be found. All right, so how do they hunt? They are fast moving and they're predatory insects. So just look at their mandibles. I mean, that is something that you would not want to mess with if you were a small animal or a small prey. They use sight to first locate their food. Oftentimes their food is very fast as well. And then they eat just pretty much anything they can catch. They dine on other beetles, leaf hoppers, ants, caterpillars. They're also known to scavenge for food. And there have been studies that showed that there have been vertebrate animals that have died. So like a possum or raccoon, and there are tiger beetles that will come and scavenge off of that vertebrate carcass as well. And then some species are nocturnal, some species are diurnal, which means they're active during the day. Even the ones that can hunt during the day have such a good sight ability that even in complete darkness, they can find their food, which is pretty impressive. And then they have a very large spectrum of prey, like we talked about. So they're opportunistic hunters. Anything that comes along that is able to chase and to fit into their mouth, they are able to focus on. So even though we know a lot about tiger beetles as a main portion here, we know a lot about their diet. Little is really known about their prey preferences, if they have them, and also their hunting strategies of most species. We know they're predatory. We know they have these sickle-shaped mandibles, but overall, as far as like studies that have been done as far as their hunting preferences and their hunting abilities, there's not much literature out there. So a lot of it we're kind of scientifically estimating and guessing as far as those species go. All right, so while they're hunting, once they first find their food, they lock in it as far as their vision goes. The next thing is to basically chase their food. So we saw earlier in that video them kind of stopping and moving and stopping. They have this really interesting behavior or strategy known as pause and look. So generally, tiger beetle will locate its prey visually. It starts to pursue it during the day, and basically they run really fast. They stop and they look around. Basically what's happening is the tiger beetle sometimes will also wait. So if it's in a shaded area, it will sit really still and then wait for something to walk by and then grab it with its mandibles as well. If the attack is successful and they grabbed their prey, the tiger beetle will grab it with their mandibles. They will test the prey. So basically what they do is they will test it when it's in its mandibles for the size, the hardness, sickness, and also if that animal has noxious chemicals on it. So it can detect all that. If it deems that it's okay to eat, it will consume it. If not, if it's too hard and they don't think that it's going to taste very good, they will actually let it go and go find something else. Also, if the prey is too large, so sometimes they do capture things larger than they can eat or that they can hold and eat down, they will quickly release it. It's not worth their time or their energy. And then something else that I also found interesting is that tiger beetles use memory of the shape and the location of their prey to kind of distinguish small prey located at shorter distances from large prey located at longer distances. So there was a study that compared different tiger beetles and their hunting preferences, very few studies that are out there. And basically what happened is that they remember. So basically what they will do is they remember the shape, the size, kind of the memory, muscle memory of that prey. And if it's able to eat, they will consume it. And if not, it's not worth their time. All right, so we talked earlier about how fast they run. So basically what happens is they run so quickly, they go blind. So a reminder to tiger beetles that if you chase prey at high speeds, you will go blind temporarily. This is not a forever type of thing. But basically tiger beetles run so quickly, their brain cannot form images. So they just aren't able to gather enough photons to form an image of their prey. So earlier when we saw that video, we saw them run and stop, and they have that pause and look behavior. That's why they have to pause and kind of intersperse stopping and looking around to rebuild that image in their head. And once they have it, they can move. So they move so quickly that they go blind temporarily because their brain cannot keep up and form an image in their head. It doesn't mean that they are not perceptive. It just simply means that during their high-speed chase, they're not getting enough photons being reflected from their prey to make an image and then locate it. So even though that they can't do that, they have to stop. It kind of seems like they would not be efficient hunters. But again, they're so quickly doing this that when they stop and look around, it's temporary, but they're still able to then go chase their food. So they're so quick that they can keep up, make that image in their mind, stop, regather and reorient themselves, and then move on. So this type of pause and look behavior is extremely unusual. So that's kind of what makes tiger beetles so unique. So even in the midst of like hot pursuit, they will stop 3 or 4 times to kind of reorient themselves toward their prey, and then they will go try and find it again. Like I mentioned, even after a few stops, the tiger beetle has enough time still to overtake its prey during those high-speed chases. All right, so how fast are we talking about? So there was a guy, he was a professor of entomology at Cornell University. His name was Cole Gilbert, and he basically devoted his life to studying tiger beetles. So at the time of this study, there was an Olympic basically superstar named Michael Johnson, and he compared how Michael Johnson ran the 200 meters versus the tiger beetle. So it's funny that they kind of compare these two things because one's a person, one's a tiger beetle, but he was really looking at like how fast these animals go. So basically this person, Michael Johnson, he at the time at least held the record for the 200 meters. He did it in 19.32 seconds, which averages about 10.35 meters per second. So when he did this, averaged it all out, 23.1 miles per hour as far as he was going compared to how fast he ran and the meters on average. So this person, they did some statistics. He was 6 feet tall, and so his 10.35 meters per second becomes 5.6 body lengths per second compared to his size. So a tiger beetle, the top speed for a tiger beetle at the time was 0.5387 meters per second, which when you calculate that out, it's 1.2 miles per hour. So not very impressive, but tiger beetles, we also have to take into account their size is a lot smaller. So this person, like I mentioned, 6 feet tall. Tiger beetles have a body length of 10 millimeters, the ones that he was studying, which are known as bronzed tiger beetles. So they spend length of about 10 millimeters, and they ran at about 0.53 meters per second, which becomes about 53.87 body lengths per second. So relatively, a tiger beetle ran 10 times faster than the best human sprinter at the time. which is pretty impressive. But not quite as impressive as the Australian species. There's another even faster beetle out there. This one was 20 millimeters long, so twice as long as the other one, and ran 2.5 meters per second. And then this relative speed was about 125 body lengths per second. So it's moving at 125 times its body length in a second. That is very fast. Michael Johnson, looking at how fast he would have to run to compare to a tiger beetle, he would have to run a 200-meter race in 0.87 seconds to equal the relative quickness of this Australian species. Or if he wanted to slow down, he could run 2.03 seconds to equal that bronzed tiger beetle that we talked about earlier. So moral of the story is that tiger beetles are very quick. So even though they're small, when you compare their body lengths and their body sizes to that of even the fastest human sprinter, they are 10 times as fast as that human sprinter. All right, so mating. So one of the things that makes them also unique is that they reproduce very uniquely as far as insects go. So they have this whole process that they go through. They have the mating, the egg laying, and then that larval development. So mating will occur soon after they emerge, but its repeated mating could happen throughout the adult lifespan of the insect. So male tiger beetles will pursue females by running in short bursts and then jumping on their backs. So this is what you're seeing here. The female will then try to get the male off. So she'll, like a horse, she'll try to buck him off. But successful males will be able to stay on, and then she will allow them to fertilize her eggs. This mating process could take several minutes or several hours. And then what would happen then if the male all of a sudden would decide to leave? The female could then get pursued by another male, and then his chances of fertilizing eggs would be gone. So to have this happen and to have this stop, a female will let the male ride on her back, and it's known as mate guarding or contact guarding. So males basically will use their abdomens to grab onto the female's thorax. You can actually see it in this picture here. This white little piece that looks like a tooth, that is the mandible, and it is hooked onto the female's thorax so he does not come off. And then the male will ride on top of the female for a very long time, basically discouraging other males to not even try. That's his female, and then he has fertilized those eggs, and he does not want anyone else to have a chance. So then once the female has had the eggs fertilized, after mating, she will dig a hole in the soil and lay a single egg. Some species are different. It all just depends. There's one called the Puritan tiger beetle, lays their eggs singly in the sand by plants. Other species like the Salt Creek Tiger Beetle, they lay their eggs in moist soil. Ours in particular lay their eggs in salty or saline wetlands or soil. We'll talk about them later. But it just kind of depends on the species and where they lay their eggs. All right, and then once those eggs have kind of developed and they've hatched, they come out as larvae. So larvae don't look like much. They look like grubs, but they're equally as dangerous or predatory or voracious as an adult. I know it's kind of hard to see, but if you look towards the head of the grub or the larva, they also have these mandibles that look like little claws, those sickle-shaped mandibles. So basically tiger beetle larvae, they go through 4 larval development stages. So they have something known as complete metamorphosis. So they go through 4 stages of their life, and then over a period of, depends on the species, 1 to 4 years, which is quite a long time for an insect. But they also kind of build a side chamber in their burrows for pupation. So what will happen is the female lays the eggs in the soil, the eggs will hatch into this larva, and then the larva basically will make these burrows in these chambers to be able to live. So they'll have an area where they will hunt, an area where then they will pupate, an area where they rest, but they will sit in the hole and they will be able to capture small invertebrate prey, and then they will overwinter their first year. During really stressful conditions like super hot times, heavy rains, the larvae will actually seal off their burrows, so they won't go hunting, they won't do anything. They're basically just waiting for that harsh weather to pass. And then basically what will happen then is that after that pupation, the adult tiger beetle will dig itself out of the soil and emerge as an adult. So very kind of cool. One of the things, we'll talk a little bit more about Salt Creek Tiger Beetles here. I guess I'll mention them a little bit, but Well, I guess also too, depends on the species and where these species are located. Obviously, ones in Colorado are going to have a lot different than ones in Florida. So basically what will happen is that the spring and fall beetles, they emerge as adults in the summer and then, or in the fall, and then they will overwinter in the burrows and then emerge again in the spring to mate and lay eggs. The summer beetles will emerge as adults in early summer, mate and lay eggs, and then they will actually die. So it kind of depends on the species. But obviously the larva will overwinter at least one of those years. All right, so I really do want to talk a little bit about Nebraska tiger beetles since we are known for having more species than other states surrounding us. So I just picked a few that are kind of common. Like I mentioned earlier, we technically have 32 species, but 3 of those species, some people think that one was a mistake, one has never been found again, and one is so rare. There hasn't been a record since like 1919, so more than 100 years. So technically we have 29 species that are common and that we know about and that they are here in Nebraska. So like I mentioned, some are more common than others, and Nebraska also has one of the rarest insects in the world, which is that Salt Creek Tiger Beetle. All right, so there's one called the green claybank tiger beetle. I won't go through all of this because I know you can read, but they are interesting. They're metallic green. They have these white markings on them. They're mostly found in the Les Hills. So if you imagine the shape of Nebraska, kind of that south central area in the Les Canyons, and then kind of all the way out west. But they are less common in the Pine Ridge, but their habitat is those clay or those Les banks, and then those eroded cliff areas as well. Again, they need that open area and space so that they can hunt. All right, there's one called the punctured tiger beetle. It gets its name because if you look down the back, you'll notice it looks like someone has pinpricked it. Those kind of textures on that elytra on their back wings. These guys aren't as bright colored as the other ones. They're kind of rarely green or blue, but they're mostly dull and black in color. But they range from the eastern United States all the way west to Nevada. They're found nearly everywhere in Nebraska. You might have even seen one. They're found in pretty much any habitats. These are also ones that you can find on city sidewalks. And then also you can find them basically summer into the fall. We also have the bronze tiger beetle. This one might sound familiar. This is the one that Cole Gilbert used in his study at Cornell when he tried to compare how fast different species of tiger beetles were to the 200-meter dash person. This one has bronze markings on it. It's found nearly statewide in Nebraska. They like creek banks and mud and wet sand. And then mostly their active times are April through October. All right, this one's my favorite. It's called the festive tiger beetle. Bright color, metallic orange or red, very bright, kind of hairy looking insect. Found in the western 2/3 of the state. It likes the area of open areas, sand with very sparse vegetation, dry creek banks. This is one that's really common in the sandhills. So if you're in Nebraska and you're in the sandhills, you probably will see one of these, but they're found mostly in the western 2/3 of Nebraska. And then this one's also really neat. Looks very similar to the bronze tiger beetle. It's called the oblique lined tiger beetle. This one's a little bit larger, 12 to 15 millimeters. They have dark brown. They're kind of scattered in the state. It's really hard to get records on them, but the one that I found, just about every other county had a record. So they could be more common than people think. But one of the things that people found consistently is that when they found them outside of Lancaster County, they were consistently larger than the ones that you would find inside Lancaster County. I didn't really see a reason why we're finding that, but it was kind of something interesting to note if there's something weird in Lancaster County that's keeping them smaller than other ones that are found outside of Lancaster County. So kind of an interesting thing. All right, so there's lots more. There's 29 species. Some are very common. Some have had like 2 records ever. But one that we're really proud of in Nebraska, especially here in Lincoln, is called the Salt Creek Tiger Beetle. So this is one of the rarest insects in the world, simply because it's only found in 2 counties and probably like 25 square miles. You can only find this in the world. So it's called the Salt Creek Tiger Beetle, and this is what it looks like, kind of like a normal tiger beetle like you've seen. But what's so special about the Salt Creek Tiger Beetle? Well, it's one of the world's rarest insects, and in Nebraska, it's listed as an endangered species. Spends most of its time as larva. One of the things about these guys is that they are only known to occur in Lincoln or Lancaster and Saunders County, just kind of north of Lincoln. So they are known as an endemic species. They're found nowhere else in the world, but they mostly live underground. They're metallic brown, kind of a dark olive color. They have some green at the top of them, and they have this really metallic green underside. Adult beetles will also have those sickle-shaped mandibles, very similar to all the other tiger beetles that they use to catch their prey. All right, so the range, like I mentioned, 3 sites have been found in Lancaster County and some just into Saunders County. One of the things that's keeping them as an endangered species is the stream channelization. So if you've heard of Salt Creek, or sometimes people call it like Dead Man's Run in Nebraska, in Lincoln area, this is their habitat. So a lot of that stream has been channelized and it's had a huge impact on the species. So why is this such a big deal? So when they straighten the stream, it results in higher water velocities, which basically contributes to lowering of the Salt Creek stream bed. So they need that water, they need those loose soils and moist soils to be able to lay their eggs. So water flows to the lowest point, and the lower the stream bed to drain the nearby wetlands leads to the drying and loss of the wetland habitat, which is where they are found. Presently, there are less than 15 acres of suitable Salt Creek tiger habitat beetles. So if you think about it, that means 15 football fields is about their range in our state. All right, so here's a little baby. This is a larva. Our zoologist is holding this. So adults will merge in June and begin mating shortly after that. The eggs are laid in that saline soil. So if you've never heard the word saline, it just means salty. So at one point in Nebraska, J.P. Morton, like the salt company, actually tried to mine salt in Nebraska or grab it out of the ground. It was that salty. It wasn't a great business, so they decided not to do that. But a lot of animals, very unique animals, live on this salt flat. And so it's one of the only place in the world that you can find these Salt Creek tiger beetles. So they lay those eggs in that saline or salty soil, and then a few days after mating, they begin hatching around 14 days, and then they go through 2 larval stages before the first year, and then they will burrow down below the frost line during the winter time. When spring comes, they will then eat as much as they can, and then they will overwinter another winter. When they have eaten enough, they will then pupate and go through that metamorphosis or that change and then become an adult. So when we talk about Salt Creek tiger beetles, the larva spend about 2 years in the soil eating prey that comes by its hole, and then it will change into an adult. This is weird for insects. Usually it's very quickly for them to do that. So these tiger beetles are kind of unique in their developmental process. All right, their status. What do they actually look like? So there's been a lot of studies done. Our zoologists, the Lincoln Children's Zoo, Omaha Zoo, has all been partners in this, University of Nebraska. So in 2012, the UNL, University of Nebraska Lincoln, researchers counted about 374 adult Salt Creek tiger beetles. The most beetles ever counted was in 1991 when the study began. They found about 777 individuals in 2002. And then the fewest beetles counted was 153 in 2005. And then all of these beetles were confined to just those 3 areas north of Lincoln. So there were 6 different beetle populations in 1991, but populations now at those 3 sites have since died off, unfortunately. So what are our conservation efforts? What are we hoping to do with these tiger beetles? So this is our zoologist, Sean Dunn. He's the one that's kind of in charge of the tiger beetles, but he also has a lot of help from other partnering agencies in Nebraska. So there's been several efforts that have been made since about the 1990s to manage, protect, and restore the saline wetlands for the benefits of the Salt Creek tiger beetle, but also for other species as well. So when we look at this, Sean kind of mentioned that last spring was really hard for our Salt Creek tiger beetles. We had a severe drought, and that really impacted and reduced the amount of reproduction that we had, and then also the offspring development. But conservation partnerships like the Eastern Saline Wetlands Partnership have been extremely beneficial in kind of protecting those wetland areas. Also, there's been ongoing efforts with like the Lincoln Children's Zoo, the Omaha Zoo, and also the Topeka Zoo in raising Salt Creek tiger beetles larvae in captivity and then re-putting them out into the wild, replacing those into the wild to hopefully then grow into an adult. So what's Game and Parks doing? So according to our natural heritage zoologist, the populations are stable to decreasing, which is kind of a wide range. Kind of depends on the year. But like I mentioned, last year was a hard year. But current efforts basically include an overarching thing of just managing those saline wetlands. If you do not protect the saline wetlands, we should not even try for tiger beetles. You can't manage just the species. You have to manage the habitat as well. So really looking at that, and what does that mean? It means managing for invasive species, a lot of prescribed burning around that area, and tree removal and grazing. They need those salt flats and those open areas to be able to hunt. So if there's a lot of trees, it doesn't work. And also, like I mentioned, raising those Salt Creek Tiger Beetle larvae in captivity in the wild and then replacing them in the wild. Last year, they released over 250 Salt Creek Tiger Beetle larvae back into the saline wetlands. So this is what they do. I've actually been part of this process, and it's quite interesting. So in Nebraska Game and Parks, we have the first larval stage of the beetles. Just after they hatch from their eggs, they are then put into saline soil. So gathered saline soil from the wild. They're put in these little condiment cups. And then basically there's one larva per cup. So they keep them in an incubator that mimics the temperature and the light patterns for the current season. So as the days and the nights get shorter or longer, the temperature and the light mimic that. So it's almost like they're actually in the wild. And then once they are able to be released, they will release them from the lab into the wild. They do this a little bit quicker than normal though. So the ones in the lab get fed really well. They eat crickets and fruit flies. And so once they do that, they eat so much that they will complete their life cycle in 1 year versus 2 years. So they raise them in the lab for 1 year, and then they're able to go back out in the wild as adults. So it's fun to release them. And one of the things that you got to do is, so you take this little condiment cup, you open the top, and when you're out releasing them, you get a like a child paintbrush, and you take the very end of it, you poke it in the soil, and then you put the beetle in the soil, and the beetle will then bury into the soil. So very simple, and then you cover it up and they're ready to go. And that is your releasing of the tiger beetles. Like I mentioned, what happens then is there's a lot of partners that help with this project. It's not just Game and Parks. So like the LPS NRD, Lower Platte South NRD, Nebraska Game and Parks, City of Lincoln, Pheasants Forever, Henry Doorly Zoo, Lincoln Children's Zoo, Topeka Zoo, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and then also Platte Basin Time Lapse as well. So very interesting process. And if you ever want to be a part of that, I bet Sean would love the help. So. All right, so that was about it for tiger beetles. We covered a lot today in 45 minutes. So next week, we're going to be able to talk about slime mold. So this is going to be a new thing for me. I'm going to do a ton of research because I know very little about slime molds. But then we'll work on milkweed. And then just a reminder, July 4th, that week, the next Thursday that week is actually the 4th of July. So we will not be having a science of, but we'll follow that with the sandhills and then kind of wrap up this summer series with ticks. So if you want more and you really like this, we have tons more Science of Education YouTube channel. You can check that out. We have a playlist called The Science of. There's about 75 videos on there. So odds are there's some theme or topic that you can find interesting. We also have a Facebook page and an Instagram page as Nebraska Wildlife Education. You can learn more about events and different things coming up. And then we also have that website as well. All right, so that's all that I have, but we can go ahead and check if there's any questions or comments in the chat, and then otherwise we can send you guys on your way, and hopefully we'll see you next week. So someone said, thank you, great presentation. So it always worries me when I don't have things because did I overwhelm you or just not give you enough information? But I know we're a small group today. So like I mentioned earlier too, everyone that registered, regardless of you're here today, you will receive an email from me that will give you the link for this when it gets up on YouTube, and then also just some more resources for you as well. And then you can able to register for next week for the slime mold. So, all right, we hope to see everyone next week from 3 to 4 p.m. on Thursday. Otherwise, thanks everyone for watching. I really appreciate it. And we will see you next week. So thanks everyone.